Well, that night we got a phone call from an individual that said President Obama wants to meet you all tomorrow and just thank you for what you've done in the world of business. And so I just said tomorrow, which was the state championship in Nashville. And I said, can I call you back in 10 minutes? And they said, sure. And so I hung up from that phone call, kind of went off by myself. And I just thought, you know what? He's a senior. State championship right now is
Yeah.
the biggest thing in his world. President Obama, as great as he was, is not going to know my name 5 minutes after I leave the White House.
From the IT company, it's Made Right Here, the stories of East Tennessee founders, creators, and builders. From the idea behind it to the impact it had on the community, their employees, and their personal lives, we're taking you behind the scenes of the movements they built. Hey there. On today's episode, I've got part one of two of my conversation with Misty Mays of Management Solutions. And really, the first part is just her family, her life story of growing up, and the heavy influence of her dad is really going to come out. Him and her mom both, like their work ethic, the way they cared for her and her family just made a massive impact on the woman that she became. And also the importance and the impact of family to her, especially as a female entrepreneur. So this is really going to be a great just first episode, and I hope you love it as much as I did talking to Misty.
I am born and raised in Knoxville. Grew up in Farragut. My parents met in South America, which I think is interesting. My father grew up in Arkansas and came from a low income family and was actually a sharecropper that picked cotton most of the time. And so as soon as he turned of age, he jumped out and enrolled in the military and was in the Marine Corps. My mother, on the other hand, grew up in a more affluent Knoxville family, be in South America at the same time because my dad was in the Marine Corps and my grandfather on my mother's side was involved in the military over there. And so my dad was actually the driver for my grandfather, and that's how my mother and he met. Neither one at the time had a college degree. And so my mom had been in and out of college, but traveled a lot with her family and just it wasn't a priority to finish her degree. And so when they got married, my mom was insistent that my dad get his degree. And he worked at the same factory for 35 years in Knoxville, Roman Haas, which is now Dow Chemical. He worked the night shift, would come home during the morning, play with me for a couple of hours, sleep, wake up, play with me, have dinner, and go right back to that shift. And he was going to school during the day. And he would tell me stories of how he could remember that he wanted to make me a priority. And so he would play with me in the morning and play with me in the afternoons, but he would be so tired from not sleeping enough that he would go to UT for his classes and be in the parking lot and literally trying to be doing his homework right there and would oftentimes fall asleep in the car. But he worked and he did that. And it took him 5 years of working the night shift, going to school during the day, raising a young family. And he graduated and he was then able to move up from the kind of the blue collar role to more of the professional side in that company. He had a huge influence on my life. I think just from his beginnings, because the stories that we heard is he had nothing. He grew up in a small town. They literally half the time didn't have food. He could remember one Christmas getting a toy. So everything to him, when my mom convinced him to come back to Tennessee and he got the degree and was able to make a decent income, everything to him was like a huge blessing and a gift. And so I think that instilled in all of us just this strong sense of thankfulness. He was also a very competitive athlete. He had kind of this ad hoc basketball league that went on in Knoxville that he ran and he was participatory in. And so as soon as we got of age, all three of us, sports was just a way of life. We all liked it. We enjoyed it. And it just taught us so many lessons: competition, teamwork, leadership, the work ethic, practice and all that stuff. So from early on, he got us in sports, coached all three of us. We were his priority. He worked hard, but just like he did early on when he was in school, he always made time to play with me. And then when it was all three of us, he was at the fields practicing. And he was an encouraging coach. Now, he was a Marine, so don't get me wrong. When he turned on the look, you were scared. Uh, but it was always out of a loving spirit. And I think because he came out of such a tough situation that oftentimes was physically abusive, he was almost much more gentle with us. I mean, you knew where you stood and he held us accountable. But it was always with grace and a loving heart. And he had a 17-year battle with leukemia. And what's interesting is post diagnosis, he actually trained for and ran 5 full marathons and probably about 15 half marathons. And so,
Wow.
again, I think that, that speaks to cancer wasn't a death sentence for him. It was, you
Mm,
know what, I'm going to do the best I can with what I have and I'm going to move forward. He continued to work hard. He didn't see it as a cop out. I mean, all of those lessons
mm,
taught me it's so much about your mindset. It's how
yeah.
you're going to deal with different situations that ebb and flow that are natural in life. And whether you see that with a fixed mindset and you want to shut down, or a growth mindset that says, I'm going to do the best I can, I'm going to keep moving forward. And so he did that. So, what a great
Mm,
example, even in what some would consider a death sentence for that 17 years, he battled through. And then, when he finally died, we had some sweet time with him in the hospital before the end when we realized that there was no other alternative and they had started
mm,
the morphine and the process was ending.
mm,
We let some of the friends and family know, and what a huge lesson for me was that he had given back. He had done so much at work, but he had given back to so many people in the community, a
mm,
lot of young men that he had coached. It was literally a steady stream of young men that are now in their 30s that were coming in and said, you taught me to be the father I am today, the husband
oh,
I am today. It was an incredible to observe that. And, when I walked away and had some time to process that, it really has been a great lesson for me to say, you can do whatever you want to do in your job, and people are going to have jobs and you're going to do a good job. But at the end of the day, what matters is the impact you have on the greater kingdom and on people. Um, and even his people he worked with came in and talked all about these great things he did, but it
mm,
quickly came back to the personal impact he had had on their lives. And
yeah.
so that was a huge positive. I mean, you always, never want to lose a parent, but when I look back and I've got those kinds of memories that I was able to see, it's just a game changer for me. And it really level sets my perspective. When he passed away, it was hard because it was on Thanksgiving morning, which was a
Mm,
terrible time. Um, when I spoke at his ceremony, one of the things I said is it's ironic he died on Thanksgiving because what he always taught us is that thankfulness takes the sting out of adversity.
wow.
And so I try to remember that all the time. And what was hard for me is I do a big Christmas, I do a Thanksgiving party and a Christmas party for our company. And it's always a big, sweet time for me to be able to take the work hat off and really share the importance of what Thanksgiving means, what Christmas means to our staff. And so, ironically, when his service was over and I came back to work, I had our Christmas party that day with our company. And I was supposed to come in and lead that and obviously be excited and joyful. And I could just remember standing outside very honestly. I think when you have key mentors in your life pass
Mm,
away, it almost knocks you back. And that's what I
mm,
felt like is I almost felt like, how do you even take a breath to go on?
yeah.
Um, and so it was a tough point. And that's where I think, one of the gifts that I have is, and I think a lot of CEOs have this, is to be able to compartmentalize. We've
Mm,
got to be positive. We've got to be leading the path. And our personal lives just don't ever, don't always line up for that.
mhm,
And so it's okay, I think, to acknowledge how hard that was. I have a sister and a brother behind me. I'm the oldest. And then my mom, she had 3 children under the age of about 4.5. And so she got us to where we were into school. And then she went back and got her degree in education, and was actually a teacher in Knox County. She was head of the English department at Farragut High School for nearly 30 years. So, education was obviously very important to them. I played sports a lot. I was decent in math and science and enjoyed that. I loved government. I used to think that when I was growing up, I wanted to be a lawyer and then some type of politician. I've been a big proponent of to whom much is given, much is expected.
mm,
And so I've always had a very strong civic duty disposition. And so even in high school, I was on a ton of organizations and got onto those and quickly moved into leadership in those. So I knew I had a propensity for leadership. But when I went to college, I didn't have a roadmap. I mean, a lot of
mm,
people talk about, I knew I wanted to be this, and, I didn't. And so, in all honesty, because at the time, being a female, if you were good in math, they kind of directed you to either nursing or accounting. And I can't stand the sight of blood. So I defaulted to the accounting side and went to UT, had a great experience, got involved really, extensively there. But my junior year, I was like, once you get through intermediate accounting, you're over the big hurdle. And so they start talking about job placement. And I was just like, I just don't see myself doing this. I don't have the passion to be an accountant. I had started dating a guy at UT who's now my husband, Sam, and he was in engineering. And so we would go and study a lot, and and this sounds very simple, but this tells you how I thought. He had that green graph paper that all the engineers draw their stuff on, and he had like a protractor and all that stuff. And I'm sitting over here reading a marketing book that, was kind of hit or miss. And so I would always take a piece of his paper and I'd always be like, tell me your problem. Let me draw it out for you. You work it, because I didn't know it, but I'll draw it out. And anyhow, after about 6 or 8 months of that, he was finally like, I don't see why you're not an engineer. You like math, you like doing what I'm doing. And so he really said, why don't you go in and talk to the dean of the College of Engineering about switching over? I had no idea what an engineer did. I think, back in, especially when I was in school, um, in the 80s, when you were at a university, from engineering perspective, I mean, when I started, there were 7 females out of the entire college. And I think that those females would tell you that they were either pushed in there by a father that was an engineer or an uncle or something like that. And I just didn't have that in my background. So it never dawned on me. I was excited. I was scared, but excited. I went home and shared it with my parents. And you can imagine, as parents, they said, you've changed your entire career over a boy that you've only been dating for a small period of time. And they said, do you realize you've got a sister that's in college and a brother that's right behind you? And now you're wanting to change your major as a junior. But I went in, and they were very gracious to help me, and basically mapped me out a 2-year plan. And so what that looked like, though, was I took anywhere from 18 hours to 24 hours a quarter. We were on quarters at the time. And that was tough because, I mean, that was literally 5 days a week, all day. And then my senior year, which was the equivalent of kind of my 5th year because of the transition, I had to do an internship and I had to get some practical experience. So, I tell people that, one of the things I'll say is no one will outwork me. And so when I set that goal, what the reality of that looked like, we're in those classes all day. When I did the internship, I went to class all day. I hopped on a bike because I didn't have a car, rode my bike downtown to the TVA Twin Towers, did my internship from 5 at night to 9 at night, rode my bike back to campus, and then did my homework. And, that was a lot, but I think that taught me discipline. That taught me hard work for a period of time pays off eventually. So a lot of good lessons there. That was probably the biggest professional game changer of my career, because when you come out of college in the late 80s, and you're a female engineer, that was a hot commodity. I mean, I think it's still a hot commodity today, but it was really a hot commodity back then. And so that was just a huge pivot for me professionally. In my career, one of the people early on that made a big impact on me is I had switched from, my first job was Alcoa, so I was in a manufacturing environment, and I switched over to a consulting and more management consulting environment. It was really my first introduction to project management. And I hired him under a boss named Jerry Michael, and he was probably 45, 50 years old, had been in the profession 30 years. And here he had this young industrial engineer that probably couldn't spell project management. And he put me in the group and he gave me an opportunity when he hired me. And then he just really poured into me. He was my manager from the age of 24 until I started Management Solutions. So for a good, 15 years. And during that time, he pushed me to do more than I thought I could do. And I've tried to do that in turn, but he would say, hey, I'm going to put you in this position. I'd be like, well, I'm not sure I know how to do that. He'd be like, well, you don't. I know you don't, but I know you're going to work hard, and I know I'm going to mentor you, and that combination will make you successful. I can remember he ran an entire, big organization. And so he had an offsite strategic meeting with his leadership team, and it was in Atlanta, and he invited me to go. And of course, the only female, and I was 25, 26 years old, and most of these other guys were white males that were 50 and above. So we rode in a van together all the way to Atlanta. I didn't say anything. And so that first night we went to dinner, and it was at this really like 5-star seafood restaurant. And he ordered crab legs for the table. I had never even seen a crab leg. I didn't know how you ate it. I literally didn't know what you did with it. I can remember, obviously wanting to blend in, and he knew that I was uncomfortable. I sat beside him, and he was like, hey, it's fine. Just watch what everybody else is doing. And so I, broke the crab leg. I didn't know that when I saw people eating it, I didn't know they were eating just the meat. And so that very first bite, I bit off the claws as well and swallowed them
Oh
and
my.
was literally like choked the whole meal without coughing. Like they were in my throat and I was worried
Oh
about
my.
it. The next night we go to a different place and it was a steakhouse and I had no idea what I ordered, but I ordered a pet portobello filet, not knowing that was a mushroom. I thought that was just some kind of steak. And he just went behind me, went over to the waiter and said, she doesn't want a portobello filet. She wants a regular filet. It was just things like that. And then in the
Wow.
business side, he put me in positions to thrive. He basically said, I'm going to meet you halfway. If you'll work
Mm.
hard and do your own learning and that kind of stuff, I'll give you the opportunity. And so when he left that company and went to another company, I followed him. He put me in a more senior position. Every time I was underqualified, underprepared, but we made a great team. And his ability to see that work ethic in me and his ability to pour into me enabled me to really skyrocket to levels that I would have never gotten in a traditional engineering role. And and it gave me the confidence to run divisions and organizations that really helped me when I decided to start the company. I had the confidence because I'd had the experience in doing that he gave me that
Mm.
was, like I said, way beyond my years and way more than I ever deserved, probably. So he had a huge impact on me. Ironically, similar story. When I started the company, he came to work for me part time as a retiree, and actually had a heart attack while he was doing that with one of my clients. And so
Wow.
that was another hard loss to deal with when you're leading a company and your kind of your professional mentor dies. I
Mm.
found myself leaving the hospital, and I got in my car and obviously I was upset, but I literally thought, what do I do next? It was almost
Mm.
like I reverted back to when I was brand new in that career, that
Mm.
profession. And I was like, what do I do? I don't know what to do technically. And I mean, you just, all those thoughts are going through your
Mm.
mind. And then over the weekend and some time to kind of de stress from that, I was able to think, you know what, Misty, you know what to do. He's trained
Mm.
you what to do for such a time as this. Now do it. But then somebody that made a big impact on my life is a lady named Reba Akins. And she's still alive today. She's bedridden with Parkinson's and stuff, but she
Mm.
was a second grade teacher to two of my three sons. And was just a huge impact on them and just taught them so much. They went to a Christian school and she taught them a lot about missionaries and the importance of serving and it just really resonated with our
Mm.
family. And so I was able to cultivate a really special relationship with her. And fast forward several years, she didn't have any children of her own. She and her husband didn't, and she was having some surgery. And so um, I told her that I would come and stay with her at the hospital. Her husband wasn't well enough to stay the night, and so
Mm.
that was something simple I could do to give back to her after all she had done and poured into my
Mm.
kids. And so
Yeah.
during the night after her surgery, the doctors came in and shared that it in fact was a cancer diagnosis. And so I fretted for probably the wee hours of the morning for 2 or 3 hours on how was I going to tell this woman that she actually had cancer. What happened next is so indicative to her life and the way she lived it. Is when she woke up from this surgery, not knowing the prognosis or the outlook or the diagnosis, she said to me, "Hey, Misty, can you just start reading again from the Book of Acts?" She had me reading from the Book
Mm.
of Acts prior to her surgery and as they put her to sleep, and she just wanted me to pick that up again. And so I'm thinking to myself, here I've fretted for these multiple hours on how I'm going to tell her. She's not even asking me what the
Mm.
doctor said. And so I read to her for hours. And finally, when they brought in lunch that day, I said, when they left, I said, "Do you want to know what the doctor said?" And she said, "Sure, you can tell me, but it's not going to change my
Mm.
perspective and it's not going to change what I think is really, really important." And I just
Wow.
thought, wow, look at that faith of somebody who dedicated their lives to pour into the next generation and didn't just talk the talk, but walk the walk. And for me
Yeah.
to see as a young mom and a young wife, that kind of faith put into action, it was just game changing for me because I think as a young mom, you fret over everything your kids are
Mm.
doing. And I just thought, you know what, if I keep a kingdom focus and an eternal focus and I'm not so caught up in the day to day. And so I've just been
Yeah.
so fortunate that people have been good role models for me and have given me an opportunity and given me a chance. And so I just try to, I'm not saying I'm perfect, but I can tell you just about every day I'll reflect back to one of those lessons and go, okay,
Yeah.
let's recalibrate and go from here. One of the things I tried to do before I started Management Solutions was keep a journal of to your point, the great qualities that some of my bosses had and some
Mm,
of the things that I knew I didn't want to replicate. To me, it's a whole lot harder as a leader and a manager to give feedback to people when you don't have the relationship side first. And they know that at the end of the day, you care about them as a person. We're slow to hire. I mean, we're
mm,
a multiple step process to hire.
yeah.
But that's because I want them interviewing us just like we're interviewing them. Because I'll tell them straight up, listen, I feel like I'm not only hiring you, I'm hiring your family. There's so much negative stuff going on in the world that when you come into work, I want it to be a place that challenges you, where you're around really smart people and you're brainstorming. But I want it to be a safe haven. I don't want it to stress you out because I just
Mm,
think there's so much on families in the world today that when you come out and you're trying to be a mother and a father and a husband and a brother and a son and whatever you want to say, if work is stressful, that's going to carry over into that.
mm,
And so I want people to know that it's a partnership and that we do understand that those people have a personal life and there is the holistic person. But I also want to know we're going to drive them to excellence. We're going to push them to deliver. I just think it's so important that you remember that people are human first. I do talks with obviously with my team when we all come together at work. And one of the things I start out with is, if you wake up in a free country like the USA and you've got clean access to clean drinking water that 70% of the world doesn't have, it's a good
mm,
day. So
yeah.
let's just begin from there. And it level sets the perspective. And then
Mm.
I do a Monday morning video. We call it Monday Morning Moments with Misty, where I just do like a little 3 to 5 minute, get them up to speed on what happened last week, anything
Mm,
I want them focused on. And so I always begin that by saying, hey guys, as usual, we're going to do 3 things work related and 1 thing we're thankful for. And so at the end, I share something I'm thankful for that week. And then I challenge them right after that video to stop for just a moment, name 1 thing at least that you're thankful for. And I feel like that really level sets the week for people. So, as far as starting the business, I mean, I was a high-ranking executive with a global company, and at that time, my husband and I had 2 of our 3 sons, and they were young, and just trying to balance that was so hard. And so, I went to this particular company and said, "Hey, I want to see if I can shift to part-time." And they said, no, once you reach this executive leadership level, it's a full time job.
mm,
I have a saying that I say no is just a starting point. I mean,
mm,
that's just a mantra with me. It's just my DNA. And so I thought, okay,
mm,
let me regroup, figure out how to go back and have another discussion. And so I went through 2 or 3 discussions with them, and their no became a firm no. And so I just said, okay, I'm thank you for giving me the time. I'm going to probably look at another alternative because my kids had one mom and I had
mm,
one shot, probably 18 years, God willing, I had 18 years with each one of them to make an impact on their life and to have my footprint and the things that were important to me bestowed on them. And so I went back to them and just said, hey, I'm probably going to be leaving. I just want to be upfront. I want to transition to a different role or whatever. And miraculously, they came back and said, well, we can probably work with you. Let's figure out a way that you could do
mm,
3 days a week. But at that time, pagers were a big thing. And you have to keep this pager glued on your hip. And if you'll keep it glued to you, we'll let you do 3 days a week, which was a huge blessing for them that they gave me that. I know that was counterintuitive to their culture
yeah.
and their business model. And so I thought that was going to be great. And I say this, it was a huge blessing, but it brought a lot of stresses
Mm,
because I felt like I had 1 foot in each world. So on days that I was at work, inevitably would be the days they had the field trips at school. So I was missing that. And then the days that I was
mm,
home, inevitably the pager was going off. So I could be in a mighty game going on of Hi Ho Cheerio or Candyland, and I'm getting paged. And so, I'd get to the end of that day and I'd look back on my day, and I thought, you know what? I was physically here, but I wasn't emotionally and mentally
mm,
here. And so it just wasn't, it was a hard season. Now, there were opportunities for me to take them to the zoo and all that stuff, which was great. So I don't want it to sound all negative, but it was just a really tough time. And
mm,
so I told my husband that I was praying about and thinking about starting a business. And for about 2 years, I kind of reverted back to my engineering days where I really studied and worked a model. So I
mm,
came up with about a list of about 50 questions that I wanted to know about entrepreneurs. And so I read about folks and I studied also why small to mid-sized businesses
mm.
closed. What were the top reasons? What was the driving factor? How could they have
Interesting.
been so successful at one point and then closed later? And so I gained all that knowledge. I actually put it in a spreadsheet and went through company by company. And then I met with these local CEOs and I just connected the dots. I didn't know them. I was 30 something. I had two kids. I'm a mom. They're like, who are you? But I just connected the dots through relationships to get me in front of those people or an ability to talk to them on the phone. Went through this cadre of questions, mapped it out on that spreadsheet. So I had done a ton of studying and just got to a point that, I said, hey, I want to take this leap of faith. My husband was in a good job and was extremely supportive, which is a huge thing.
Yeah.
But we did look at it. And, as we talked about it as a couple, we weren't going to be able to have the lifestyle that we currently had if I left that salary. And so, a tough challenge we did is we actually sold a home that we had just custom built. We had been in it about 4 years. But the mortgages for that and the payment for that and all the associated expenses were not something we could do if I took a cut in pay. So we actually downsized, went to a different home, and then I started getting everything in process for this company. But right after I gave my notice in this corporate position, I found out that God's timing was more than mine, and I was pregnant with our third child. And and my other kids were 9 and 11. And so you can imagine the shock. It's been a huge blessing and kept us young. I didn't have a lot of support from people, friends and family, because they're like, are you kidding? You moved to a position that a lot of women would, die to be in that position. And you just walked away from it on a dream. And you hear that, but again, I just didn't let that almost fueled me a little bit to say, I had no doubt that we would be a successful company. And so, anyhow, I took that leap of faith, started the business. First people I interviewed for the business, I used to joke, but I mean, now they know, but I would say when they would want to interview and I was trying to hire them, I would say, hey, let's just meet at Panera because I'm so busy going from client meeting to client meeting. I don't want to go back to our corporate headquarters. Well, our corporate headquarters were a little room in the back of this little house we were living in.
But I want to make sure as we talk about this, so I think there's two things that are really important to weave into this part of the conversation. Is you talked about what you're doing professionally, but the crux of our show is how you built how we built companies or organizations or whatever. But I think as a female builder, a female founder, and I speak to this because my wife is a business owner, so I've seen it firsthand. There's a unique set of challenges that come about, and people like to argue, well, it's all, but it is. I mean, it's just moms and dads have different responsibilities in the way that they operate, and you're a female, smart, educated, founded a business, had three boys, had to figure out how to raise them. Your husband is part of the business. Like there's all these things that are going on. So as you kind of talk about, I'd love to know about how did that work? How did, what, as a female first, as a mom, as a wife, help us weave all that together.
Here's what I'll say about my role as a mother and a wife. I don't believe, as my experience has been, that a female can have it all. But I challenge women. I said, one of the things I say to young women is don't think you have to have it all today. You're going to go through seasons of life. And so there'll be seasons where you're, maybe a young mom season, and you need to focus on that, knowing that you can do other things as they get older. And so try to take things in small chunks and seasons as opposed to saying, I need to go on this trajectory right now. But I stayed grounded early on that my boys and my family were going to be a priority for me. I think that was instilled from my parents. That was something that I knew was important. Oak Ridge National Lab nominated us out of their 1,100 subcontractors as their top business. From there, we went into a pool of state of Tennessee, 40,000 businesses, won that. From there, we went into an 8-state region pool, over 100,000 businesses, won that. And the president had us to Washington, D.C. with 14 regional finalists. And we actually were named the #1 government subcontractor in America, which is nothing on me. It's a huge testimony to our staff and our customers. But the reason I tell that story is they flew us to D.C. We had this huge event where they named us that, and the SBA administrator gave us our award. Right after that, they picked us up, took us to the state building where Senator Alexander and Senator Corker at the time were there, took pictures with us. It was just a huge thing. we were so thankful. We were flying out, my husband and I, the next day because my middle son was in the state high school soccer championship and he was the goalie. Well, that night we got a phone call from an individual that said, President Obama wants to meet you all tomorrow and just thank you for what you've done in the world of business. Um, and so I just said tomorrow, which was the state championship in Nashville. And so I said, I'm going to have to call you back. And of course, you can imagine their chagrin. They're like,
Yeah.
what? And I said, can I call you back in 10 minutes? And they said, sure. And so I hung up from that phone call, kind of went off by myself. And I just thought, you know what? He's a senior. State championship right now is
Yeah.
the biggest thing in his world. President Obama, as great as he was, is not going to know my name 5 minutes after I leave the White House. And so
Yeah.
I called him back and just said, hey, I so appreciate that, but we're not going to be able to come. And you can imagine, couldn't believe it. Lots of folks here couldn't believe it when they heard about it, but we made it right in time for that state championship. I was there like all the other moms cheering him on.
That's awesome.
And he remembered that. It made a big impact. And if nothing else, it
Yeah.
was a big impact on me. And, to that story, I mean, as you grow in your finances and your ability to do, one of the things that some of my mentors had said to me is, just start outsourcing everything. Now that you can afford it, just outsource everything. Focus on whatever. You get all that guidance. And I think I drank that Kool-Aid for a while. And I can remember my youngest son was probably 8 years old. And, we were trying to get decorated for Christmas and all that. And a friend of mine had just said that she had had this guy that decorated her house. And she's like, just outsource that out to him. He'll do it all. And so I called him and I was so excited. And he came and wow, did my tree, did my house, did everything. It looked like something at Biltmore. And when I came in and looked at it, I was so thrilled and just on this high. And I was like, man, it looks great and it's festive. And my little 8-year-old came in that day. I brought
Mm.
him home from school and I was excited to show him. And I showed him and he turned around and he looked at me and he had little tears in his eyes. And he goes, Mom, the best part of Christmas was our family decorating the tree. And this guy's already done
Oh,
it. And it just crushed me because I thought,
yeah.
you know what? It's not what the tree looks like. It was
Mm.
the act of the five of us
Yeah.
being together. As we hang those ornaments, we're talking about who made them and what class and their
Yep.
handprints. And I just thought, you know what? I sucked that opportunity away because I could write a check.
Mm.
And so I try to remember that. And I try to think, you know what? Outsource what isn't going to matter. And those things that
Yeah.
are important to you and your family, make sure you do them.
One of the things I think is important, as we talked about how important it is to talk about females as entrepreneurs, is there is a reality, and I don't want this to be negative. I actually want it to be something that people realize occurs and start to shift their mindset in this way. And I think that, I shared with you, like my wife as a business owner, I couldn't believe some of the things she would tell me, that people would say to her. I want to acknowledge the fact that it's not the same. I don't care what anybody says. It is not the same.
It's really tough. And even in, 2021, it's still amazing. Right before COVID, interesting enough, in the world of academics and academia, women had just gotten to the 50-50 level with men on publication of papers, which is a
Wow.
huge thing in that industry. And for the first time ever, it got to 50-50. Now, post COVID, it's 75% men, 25% women. So, what took years to get to an equal playing field is now such a huge gap. And when they deep dive back on the results of that, the mom from traditional roles was the one providing the meals. So,
Mm.
she's having to cook more because you can't go out to restaurants. You don't have food as
Hmm.
easily accessible. She's the primary cleaner of the home. Lots of us that maybe have additional outside support couldn't come into the home during the COVID crisis. And
Hmm.
so your help was gone if you were fortunate enough to have that. Um, many of us became, and dads did this as well, but we became homeschoolers. I mean, I think that as a female entrepreneur, I do have responsibility to share that story. And again, I always preface it by saying this is just my experience and my
Yeah.
opinion. Lots of things. I mean, one of the peers I work with was, when we were both at this executive leadership level, she wasn't invited to a senior leadership offsite that we had. And and I didn't even know it, I was out of town. But when we came back on that Monday, and she asked, wow, why wasn't I invited? The response was, because you couldn't pee off the back of the boat. And I just thought, that's a huge statement. And there was no apology. That was literally their statement.
Oof.
I've had times where I gave a speech at something in Knoxville not too long ago to just the community on some stuff. And when I finished, as I was, obviously people came up afterwards and were saying, wow,
Mhm.
that was great. That was great. That was great. And as I was walking to my car that evening, an older gentleman came up to me and said, hey, that was a great speech or talk. And I said, thanks. And he said, I can't imagine how long it took your husband to write it. And he was deadpan serious. Um,
Wow.
and so another example,
Yeah.
a couple of my senior engineers and I went into a meeting with a customer 2 or 3 years ago. We flew to the site. We were having executive level meetings with them. And so my two engineers had walked in before me because I'd driven the rental car and I was getting my jacket out or something. And so the CEO of the large business we were meeting with met us at the door. And I heard him as they walked in. He said, hey guys, nice to meet you. The conference room's to the right. And so when I walked up and had my stuff, he said, hey, I'm so and so. My other admin is going to meet you in a minute. She'll show you where all the coffee is. She'll show you where the refreshments are so that when we need you
Mm.
for the meeting, we'll let you know. Um,
Nice.
and my response was, hey, that's great. Looking forward to meeting her. And then one of my, engineers came out and goes, what are you doing? And he told her, and he was like, are you kidding? That's the CEO of our company. And that, again, I think that said a lot. One, he made assumptions.
Yeah.
Two, he hadn't even invested time in the company to look at the leadership or anything, obviously, on our
Mm.
website. Um, most of the meetings when I go into large executive meetings, oftentimes I'm the only female.
Mhm.
But again, something that I try to do with that, and really where I'm at now is it's ridiculous. I'm the only female in the room, and so my mindset is I'm looking behind me constantly, going, "Who's that next female that I'm going to bring in?" Because it's not
Yeah.
enough for us to have one seat. We need two or three or four.
Mhm.
I try to really pour into young girls to when you walk in a room and you're a female and it's these huge chairs that one have a propensity more for the big male body and they're all at this boardroom table, it is very intimidating to walk up
Mm.
to the table. And I think by nature we default and we sit in the back and all of
Hmm.
that. So when I'm in a room now and I feel like I've earned to be at that table, but I see these young girls coming in that maybe aren't to that point yet, I'm constantly going, sit right here. I want you at
Yeah.
the table right beside me, sitting with me. It's not enough for you to be there. You need a pipeline of women you're pouring
Right.
into that can come behind you. I speak a
Yeah.
lot at the University of Tennessee to their engineering college, and one of the things I say to those women and men is I said, you better learn how to work well with women because you're either going to be working with one or for one because we make up over
Mhm.
54% of the workforce
Mhm.
pre-COVID. But we're going to be here. And so you got to learn to navigate those
Mhm.
relationships. And I think if any female leader focused on all the negatives, they'd just be consumed by it.
Whew, that was awesome. I love chatting with entrepreneurs. Loved my talk with Misty. That was episode 1. Make sure you stay tuned in 2 weeks as we get episode 2, where we jump into her professional career and just how these things that you heard in episode 1 shaped the woman that she became, the businesses that she ran, the professional that she is, and then how she built the business and some of the trials and tribulations along the way. So stay tuned.